Hello again, everyone. In this lesson, I'm going to show you how to use the Layer Properties pane in ArcGIS to change how your data is viewed and displayed in ArcMap. We're not going to go through everything that's available in there in this lecture. That'd take a really long time, but what we will cover is how to change how your data looks in a few different ways, and how to subset it visually and prevent it from displaying at times that you don't want it to. We'll finish off by doing a brief introduction to how to label your data on your map as well. To begin with, what are we looking at here? I want to explain it in a little more detail because we're going to use this same map document across the next couple lectures, and I think understanding what you're looking at would be important to provide that context. You'll see these same data sets pop up in a few future lectures in this course as well. So we're looking at the NHD and the WBD. NHD over here stands for National Hydrography Dataset. It's a nationwide dataset for the United States that provides information on the hydrography, the streamlines and other aquatic information in the nation. Similarly, the WBD, the Watershed Boundary Dataset, provides just what it says. It's information on where watershed boundaries lie in the United States. If you're wondering what a watershed is, since you may have less familiarity with that than with streams and rivers and lakes, a watershed is the sum of the areas that feed into a single point on the landscape, maybe at a river's mouth or something like that. So watersheds encompass terrestrial areas in addition to the traditional aquatic areas. Now, I just brought these data into ArcGIS and I haven't changed any of the colors that Arc assigned by default. When you bring data in, ArcGIS just assigns some random colors to them in order to help distinguish them amongst the rest of your data. So one of the first things we might want to do is change the color of our data so that it actually reflects what we think of it as. Maybe so that the rivers are blue and the lakes are blue, and then the watersheds can be some other color that's meaningful to us. Right now the watersheds are green with gray boundaries, and it's hard to distinguish them between the green lines of the rivers that ArcGIS assigned. The lakes look pretty good. They're bluish with gray boundaries. I'll probably not touch them in this lecture. So let's start by changing the color of the rivers. I think that'll help us to see what's going on here a little bit more. And we can do that just by single clicking on the line, the symbol in the table of contents. But in this lecture, let's try to do it a little bit differently. So I'll close out the symbol selector and I'll bring up the layer properties pane by double clicking on the layer in the table of contents. And usually by default, it'll bring you to the general tab, but we can switch to the Symbology tab and see the different symbology options available to us. We can symbolize by the single symbol, just make them all the same. We can choose a category and choose an attribute from our attribute table to use for symbolizing. We can also do the same thing but with quantities of data, and then we can create charts and symbols on our data or use multiple attributes to symbolize. We'll show you a lot more about the rest of this in a future lecture on symbology, but for now, let's just change the rivers to blue. And in fact, in the symbol selector, there's a river style for us to use. So I'll click OK and I'll click apply just to see if it's what I want. And yeah, that's going to work just fine for now. So I'll click OK to close it out. Next, I'm not going to change the lake symbology, but I am going to move it up in the table of contents so that it's on top of the rivers. It makes the map a little cleaner if I don't have the rivers drawn on top of the lakes. So we'll move it up to the top and clean up the map a little. Now, finally, with the watersheds in the background, what I want to show you is a little bit of how to use those more advanced symbology features to display the data in your attribute tables. So if I right-click this time on the layer and I'll go to properties, it's going to bring up the same pane we were just looking at for the flow lines, but for the sub-watershed layer here. And in this case, I'm going to switch it to categories. What that allows us to do is select a field in the attribute table and give a unique color to every record that has the same value in that field. That might be hard to grasp in the abstract, but I'll show you it in just a moment and I think it will make more sense. So up top here, we can select the field to define the value by in the value field box. And in this case, I'm going to select the HUC8 field. Now, the HUC8 field is an identifier for these records, but it's not unique amongst every feature. The HUC12 field right here is the unique identifier. The HUC8 field instead groups them into larger groupings. So what we're going to do is assign a color and we'll see kind of a spatial pattern of groupings of these watersheds. What I'll do next is I'll set my color ramp to something that I might want. I'm going to set it to shades of blue here. And then I'll click Add All Values. And what ArcGIS is going to do is it'll look through my attribute table and look at all the records in the HUC8 field and pull out all the different unique values. And then it just gives them each a color from the color ramp up here. And if I scroll down, I'd see that they're going to overlap a bit, but overall they seem to have relatively different colors. There's also this All Other Values option up here. And that's for the case where a record doesn't have a value for that attribute and it assigns it whatever that color is. In this case, I'm not going to worry about it since there aren't any records that don't have a value there. So I'll click Apply, just like I did before, to see how it changes the symbology here. And we can see that there are groupings. So I'll click OK to close it on out. And the first thing I notice is it makes my rivers a little hard to see when I have this blue on blue here. To adapt to that, let's just go ahead and make our rivers black. So I'm going to click here and I'm going to choose a black color right down here and we'll click OK. And this is kind of an intense way to display this data. There are tons and tons of rivers everywhere here and it makes it hard to see everything else. So what we might want to do is potentially say, well, when I'm zoomed out this far, I don't need to see the rivers. They're going to clutter my view. What I really want to see here is maybe the watersheds. To do that, I'm going to take a look up here at what my scale is and see that's 1 to 672,000. And so I'll go back to the layer properties for the NHD flow lines. And I'm going to go to the General tab where it has the name. And let's change that while we're here to Rivers. And down here under Scale Range, I can set Scale Dependent Rendering. And note that it says you can specify the range of scales at which this layer will be shown. And by default, it shows up at all scales. But right down here, we'll switch it. And I'm going to say, don't show it when we're zoomed out beyond 1 to 500,000 for now. So if we zoom in, we'll see it. But once we're out at the scale that we're at currently, we're not going to see it. So I'll click OK. And the rivers disappear for now. But if I zoom into an area, they will come right back up again. And if I go back to the previous extent, they're going to disappear again. So let's go to the extent where we can see the rivers again. We'll leave the scale dependent rendering on. And I still think that this is pretty cluttered. We can see a little better now, but I want to show you another technique for us to change how much of the rivers data we are seeing. So in the good theme of this lecture, we're going to go back to the layer properties again. And I'm going to go to the Definition Query tab. And this is going to rely on a little bit of information about the attribute table that you will learn in the next couple lectures. But for now, we're just going to build a query here that defines which features show up when it's rendering the rivers layer. We could write it ourselves here, but let's go into the query builder where it shows us all the fields that we have, and then it'll help us build the query down here. So I want to show rivers only when they have a drainage area larger than maybe 5 square kilometers. So down here we have a cumulative area attribute with total drainage area in square kilometers here, abbreviated. So I'll double click it and it'll bring it down to the box here. And for those of you who've worked with databases before, notice the beginning of a SQL query, a database query that says select all of the records star from NHD flow line cumulative area where, and we're defining that where clause. So I'm adding the attribute here and I'm just going to say greater than 5. And that's 5 square kilometers in this case. And I'll click OK. And let's just click OK to close it again. And it'll re-render that rivers data for us, only showing the records where that condition is met, where they have that attribute record greater than 5. What's really nice about definition queries is that I don't create a whole new data set. I'm not duplicating anything. I'm just changing how Arc is choosing to display my data right now. A lot of times people create separate copies of data with all these conditions, and then they have to worry about what happens when they need to change information in one or the other because they're functionally the same data set, but one only has the rivers that are greater than 5 square kilometers in drainage area, and the other has all their rivers. So just to prove what we just did, I'm going to go to the attribute table now, and we'll go over to the total drainage area square kilometers attribute, and I'm going to sort it. And we'll sort it ascending, so the small values will be near the top. It's going to take a moment. And we'll notice that it starts when drainage areas get to be just a little bit above 5, just like we expected. So it's doing what we asked it to do. Close that out. And now we're going to do just one last thing for this lecture. I'm going to go back to that previous zoom so that I can see a few more of these water bodies, these lakes. And let's turn on the labels for those water bodies. And I can just right click on the layer and click label features. And it's pretty good at guessing what field to use for labeling. But if it got it wrong, I can go up to go up to the layer and go to properties and go to the labels tab. And on the labels tab, we have the same checkbox that we functionally have when we right click and select label features. We have it right here. And so I could disable it here. And we have a lot of options, but the big one I want to point out here is the field to choose for labeling. So it's going to go look up the name to choose for labeling from each attribute record. And I can choose a different field here if it wasn't getting it right. I'll leave it as it is. And then I can also change the style of the labels right here. So it's nice sometimes to make rivers have kind of a flowing label and lakes to kind of blend into the background of the reservoir or the lake. And I can change the size and the font style and the full symbol information right in here. We'll do a bigger lecture on labeling in the third module of this course, so I won't talk too much more about it right now, but know that you could turn them on right here and feel free to explore this pane. I'll just point out a few more things that we're not really going to use in this lecture, but that you should be aware of in the layer properties pane. So I'll go to the source tab, and it's going to show you some basic information about the underlying feature data. It's going to tell you what type of feature class it is. It'll tell you where it's located, so you can find the path of it on your hard drive if you didn't know where, but you knew you had it in a map document. It's going to tell you the coordinate system that the data is in as well. You'll learn what that is in a future lecture too. And if I go to the display tab here, I can set it to be semi-transparent just like we did in one of the earlier lectures. And so I could just set a percentage here and click OK, and it'll make that layer semi-transparent. I won't do that right now. And then I encourage you to take a look through the rest of the tabs in here. We're not going to use them in this lecture or even in the next one mostly, but they're very useful and they may be very useful for your workflow. A lot of them will be self-explanatory in conjunction with other features, and some of them will be a little over your head for now, but that's okay. Go take a look, play around with it. There aren't really many consequences of messing any of this stuff up except in the map document you're currently working in. So it's kind of fun to just tinker with it and see what happens. Okay, so I'll close this out now. And that's it for this lecture. And in this lecture, we learned about the layer properties pane. You learned how to set categorical symbology and just standard symbology. You also learned how to label features, and then you learned how to set scale dependent rendering and define a definition query to limit what's displayed on your map. In the next lecture, I'm going to finally explain to you this thing that I've been talking about for a while, the attribute table. We're going to talk about feature classes and attribute tables and how that all works to hopefully bring a number of components of this together for you. I'm pretty excited about it. I think this part's pretty cool, so I hope you'll join me to learn about attribute tables in the next lecture. See you there.